Hello, today is Wednesday, September 17th. My name is Richard Albert, and I'm here with Mohamed Arafa, professor of law at Alexandria University in Egypt, and also at Indiana University in the United States. And today, this is our second installment of our new video interview series here at iConnect. Mohamed, thank you very much for joining us today to discuss Egyptian constitutional law.
Richard, you're always welcome. It's always a pleasure being with you.
Thank you. So, Mohamed, I want to talk about the Egyptian constitution, but first, can you give us an update on the trials of Presidents Morsi and Mubarak? What's going on with their trials?
Sure. That's a great question to start. As we still keep watching on this trial, President Mubarak faces a retrial over his participation in the killing of protesters during the uprising that had been done against him in 2011, and the final verdict should be delivered on September 27, and I'm expecting that he will be penalized. On the other hand, President Morsi is still on criminal trial as well with respect to murder crimes, conspiracy crimes, and other corruption crimes, along with the Muslim Brotherhood's top assistants. And I'm expecting that he will face a kind of a severe punishments, roughly around 25 imprisonment and maybe death penalties. So we still keep watching on this trial that's going on in progress.
Thanks for that update. Now let's get on to the Egyptian constitution. I want to go back to last year. Then President Mohamed Morsi was in power, and after a series of events that some people have called a coup, others have called a revolution, President Morsi was no longer president. The military took control, and the military then announced steps to create a new constitution. That new constitution was approved in a referendum in January, just this year, 2014, and it's now in force today in Egypt. What are some of the big differences between this new constitution and the old constitution in Egypt?
Okay, let me start with a little bit few words on the debate that we have beyond right now regarding the description on the June 30th events and the July 3rd as well. A lot of scholars have been saying that was a military coup. Others said that was a pure revolution. I think I'm on my way to build a new theory and taking the Egyptian case as a kind of a case study of my new theory, which is called the popular coup, which I realized that this kind of new term have a kind of various characteristics from the revolution definition and from the coup definition. So I'm still on my way to develop up this new theory. Regarding the essential differences between 212 and 214 Constitution, the new charter has 5 main features that I like here to identify. First, the new charter deletes the language about preserving the inherent character of the Egyptian family and commits the state to achieving equality among men and women in all aspects of life. Cultural aspect, economic, social, political, civil, and all kind of guaranteeing all public rights. The document also enriches a provision banning discrimination on the basis of sex, religion, color, language, disability, social classes, and any other reason. Second, the new charter forbids slavery and all forms of operation and forced exploitation, including all forms of human trafficking, and defines a child as any person under the age of 18. Also, the new charter deletes article that criminalized insulting religious prophets and allow judges to implement sentences not based in the criminal code. On the other hand, the new charter also orders the new parliament in its first term to pass a law to organize building and renovating of churches that have been destroyed by the terrorist activities had been done by the radical Islamists. I can say Muslim Brotherhood here. Also, the new constitution did a great achievement at this point, that by removing a much feared article defining the Sharia, the principal source of legislation in Egypt since 1980, and to adopt a narrowly interpretation with the orthodox Sunni schools of thought. Also, the Constitution deletes an article mandating Al-Azhar as an Islamic institution to be consulted on the matters of Islamic law. So I think the role of the religion under the 214 Constitution is much more limited than 212 de facto Constitution.
It also sounds like this new Constitution is much more progressive than the old Constitution.
Yes.
Let me ask a question about human rights in the new Constitution. So I see that the right to the freedom of conscience is preserved in the new Constitution.
Yeah.
But I also see that Islam is designated as the official state religion. Are those inconsistent in any way?
Okay, let me highlight here for the first part of the question. In terms of how religion is decided or used, Article 2 of 214 Constitution still exists and remain like the de facto Constitution of 1971 and the 2012 Constitution without any alteration or change, which has been in place since 1970s under President Sadat, which provides that the principles of the Sharia or Islamic law are the main source of legislation. However, the complementary 219 article under the 212 abrogated Constitution detailing the technical definition of the Sharia principles, which was intended to be a tool for a theocratic project under the term of President Morsi. But the new Constitution in its preamble it emphasized that the supreme constitutional core interpretation of the Sharia will prevail. And also, Al-Azhar, as a most prestigious Islamic institution all over the world, is the primary reference in the religious science and all Islamic issues and have no ultimate authority over any legislation or any statute to see if it's in conformity with the Sharia provisions or not. On the other hand, and regarding your question about the human rights issues and the freedom of belief, I can say that the freedom of belief under the 214 Constitution is absolute, not only protected, as was under the 212 Constitution, as it was, and the freedom of practice religion and the establishment of houses of worship are constrained to the believers in divine or Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, and subject to the state laws, the religious collaterals. Also, the principles of the laws of Egyptian Christians and Jews are the main source of laws regulating their personal status, the religious affairs, and the selection of their spiritual leaders. So I'm thinking that the role of the religion regarding the freedom of belief is much better in 214 rather than 212 abrogated Constitution.
That's fair. One more question about religion.
I
see from our reading of the Constitution that it bans identity-based parties. For example, parties based on religion or even parties based on geography. Why is that?
Why is that? That's a great point. And I think it's very important to highlight why Egypt in its new constitution banned this kind of political parties based on religious background. This is for a direct response to that question. The world have been watching the whole terrorist activity that have been threatening Egypt after the overthrow of President Morsi, after a great mass protest against him, after the military have been assisting the general public Egyptians in overthrowing the president. So if we have a kind of these political parties based on religious background and have various interpretations of the religion, the provisions of the Quran or the Sunnah, that make a kind of various contradictions in the interpretation and in the adoption of which interpretation shall we follow, shall we adopt, shall we apply, specifically in legal matters. And always in Arab world, because Arabs are very sensitive to religion, always these political parties if they are based on religious background, they always like to interpret the provisions in a rigid way, which can be used as a tool for theocracy or for religious fascism, which is very, very dangerous for a country like Egypt. Has various kind of populations. We have like around 12% of Coptic Christians. So how we should have this kind of political parties and doing a lot of terrorist activities. For example, look at the Freedom and Justice Party of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Hizb al-Hurriya wal-Adala. Look at this party. This party have been working against the principles of democracy, right? So the Constitution said political parties may not be molded on the basis of religion, sex, gender, or geography, and parties cannot participate against activities or against the principles of democracy, being secretive or have a military or a paramilitary wings, which have been watching that some of the Salafist parties or the Brotherhood parties have activities against the principles of democracy. How we can explain these terrorist activities that have been done by these political parties, right? So I can say that this article maybe in the future need to be amended because it seems like that we still restricting the human rights, but at the current time, I think it's much better to keep that until the country have been recovered from this whole terrorist activities that have been done under the cover of religion.
We've talked about the presidency, we've talked about human rights, we've talked a bit about religion. Now let's talk about another very important institution in Egypt, which is the military. When scholars speak of the separation of powers, they're commonly understood to refer to three branches of government, right? The legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch.
Right.
But I wonder whether it's fair to say, and whether you would agree that it's fair to say, that in Egypt, there are really four branches of government. There's the House of Representatives, there's the presidency, there's the judiciary, and the military as the fourth branch. Now I know that the text of the Constitution doesn't actually identify the military as a self-standing, separate fourth branch. I know that. But as a matter of function, can we say that functionally, not formally, but functionally, there are four branches of government in Egypt?
Yes, indeed, I can say that. And how is that, right? Of course, we know that legislative authority representing the legislature, presidency representing the executive branch, and judiciary representing the courts. And then the military in Egypt. The military in Egypt, the military has a kind of a specificity in Egypt. If you look at the history, the modern history under Nasserism, it specifically started from 1952 after the Nasserism enforced the royal family, King Farouk, to resign and to leave the country. Look also at the role of the institution under Sadat when he took the decision of 1973 war against Israel. And then look also at the role of the military under Hosni Mubarak. So the military as an institution has, I think, a good role and a good role to some extent in Egypt regarding the assistance of the public life in Egypt. It helps and assists in various sectors. So if you talk about the military functionally, of course, the military, yes, assists a lot of the Egyptian public here. Look at the role of the military in housing sector, in transport sector, in the economic sector. Right now, under President Sisi, and he's from the military, he was the chief marshal and the commander-in-chief and the minister of defense under President Morsi. Right now, he started the development of the new national project, the Suez Canal project, the new Suez Canal project. And this project, a lot of companies under the supervision of the military have been working. A lot of civilian corporations also working on that. But all of the things should be done in this project should be under the supervision of the military and under the budget and the fund of the military as well. So military as an institution helps in providing goods and services to Egyptian public, even in these days, because helps in recovering the economic stance in Egypt and all of that things. It seems a little bit kind of authoritarian. To some extent, we can feel that, and we have been watching that under Mubarak and under Sadat and even under Nasser. Right now, I can say that it's much better, the role is much better, and the role is much limited. If you look at the military trials right now, I can say that not all civilians can be tried on them before the military courts. Right now, in the Constitution specified the act that civilians may be tried before the military courts. Like when the provision said, except for crimes that represent a direct attack and assaults against military facilities, zones, and even the military personnel. So I think it's much better. It had been limited. Under 212 de facto constitution, the language was ambiguous. They said crimes against military without any specification. So it was intended to be a tool to be used by the military for restricting human rights or something like that. So yeah, I think I can say yes, the military maybe describe it as a fourth branch unofficially in Egypt.
An unofficial fourth branch. This is really fascinating. One more question, if I could, sure. Mohamed.
Sure.
What kind of changes would you bring to the Egyptian constitution, or even more generally, more broadly, law in Egypt? It seems to be the case, at least from what you described to us, that the Egyptian constitution is an improvement on
right.
its previous constitution. And that's fair. It's a much more progressive document.
Right.
But there's probably still some things that you would fix, that you would change. What are those?
In my perspective, I have 3 points here in brief I wanted to highlight that Egypt maybe in need to look at for reform. First, Egypt have to continue ongoing review of the national laws to ensure that these laws are in line with the international human rights law and the international law principles. Second, we have really to lift the state of emergency by replacing the emergency law on the real ground and substitute this emergency law with a new counter-terrorism law that guarantees more civil liberties and public rights. Third, we need to expedite the reform of the criminal code, specifically with the definition of torture, to be in line with the International Convention Against Torture. In addition, that we need to reform some provisions in the penal code, specifically with respect to the journalists and reporters not to be imprisoned, specifically if they touch it like a kind of corruption crimes, if they are public figures or connected or associated with the regime. So that's very important. So we have to make sure that the police law also have to be amended and to be in line with the international standards regarding the definition of necessary to use the force. What are kind of force that the police have to use? So we need to make sure about the reform of the military justice code to make sure about the due process guarantees. So due process guarantees issues, the police enforcement agent law, the military justice code, the penal code, the other domestic laws have to be revised and to be inconsistent with the general principles of the international law, specifically international human rights law and the humanitarian law principles.
So there's still a lot of work to be done to democratize Egypt. That's clear. That's clear.
Of course.
We have about 1 minute left, but I want to use that time. What are you working on these days in terms of your scholarship, in terms of books or articles? What are you writing these days?
That's a great question now to end up with, as always. I love talking with you. These days, as I'm in Egypt, I'm in Egypt for a couple of months and then heading to the United States. But before heading to the United States, I'm heading to the Netherlands, teaching one of my two upcoming articles based on Islamic law. I'm working on how to build up a new theory in Islamic law and how to compare this new theory in Islamic law with positive laws, which is the theory of popular coup, which I'm talking about with you. Also, I'm working on a kind of a chapter in a book about the unexpected trials of the two presidents, Mubarak and Morsi as well. And in January, I have another two commitments that I have to start working on, a piece on human rights issues in Islamic law and another piece on elderly rights in Islamic law and Egyptian law. So mostly a lot of Islamic law issues, in addition, of course, to my main research area on corruption and white-collar crimes. So yeah, and it's coming more.
Fascinating. Well, thank you very much, Mohamed, for walking us through recent developments in Egypt, in particular about the new Egyptian constitution. It's really, really fascinating, and it's important for us to know about it. So thank you.
You are always welcome. It's always great to be with you. I'm very happy. I appreciate your kind invitation. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.